Welcome to the Parent Compass on SmartSocial podcast. We are so excited today to explore parenting themes to help our kids navigate between and teen years. We are your hosts, Cindy Muchnick and Jenn Curtis. And today we are welcoming New York Times bestselling author, Jessica Lahey of The Gift of Failure, How the Best Parents Learn to Let Go so Their Children Can Succeed. And if you haven't heard of this book, we don't know what rock you've been living under, because this is the Bible, it's what to follow, this is the way to go. Jessica's an educator, a speaker, a writer. She's been an English and Latin teacher and a writing teacher in middle and high school for more than a decade. And she writes the bi-weekly Parent-Teacher Conference advice column for the New York Times. She's also a contributing writer to The Atlantic and appears as a commentator on Vermont Public Radio. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you so much. What a lovely intro.
I love the historical background that lays the foundation for your book. And it's intended to kind of help us understand how over time we've gone from Little House on the Prairie, that approach to parenting, forgiving Laura's everywhere for their mistakes, to where we're at now, where failure has sort of become a bit of a curse word. How did we get here?
It's actually a bit of it's not that difficult of a formula, really. We just started having fewer kids. We started having them later in life after maybe working more, having more education. It used to be called child rearing, the act of sort of bringing kids up, and now it's called parenting. So the focus has shifted. There's a lot of, and then because we've been in education and in the workforce longer and before we're having kids, we tend to use the tools that we learned there. So the spreadsheets and the databases and all these things. And, I'm absolutely was guilty of all of these things. And, I felt like if I didn't get some kind of short-term evaluation of how I was doing, and, at first that was like the growth chart from the pediatrician. At some point I realized like the OBGYN and then the pediatrician were like the only people who were willing to listen to me talk about, all the minutia of, being at home with a kid or still being pregnant, 26 months in. At that point, I just needed some feedback on my parenting. And so, the logical place to look is to your kid. And unfortunately, what that does is that means that we're sort of looking to them to validate how we're doing. And that ends up sort of stripping away, stealing their move toward independence, their accomplishments, all of those things that should be theirs. We're taking them and saying them, oh, this is our sort of grade for how our parenting is doing. And, it's just a shift that's happened very slowly over time. There's also the media just bombards us with that, economically, our kids can't be expected to do better than us for the first time in generations. And by the way, it's impossible to get into college. And by the way, if your kid isn't at this particular place in cello by the time they graduate from middle school, they'll never, ever get that Juilliard audition. It's just this constant compounding of the fear and the paranoia that the media sort of heaps on parents. And it's unfair. And then on top of that, we do it to each other. We get together and we're on the soccer sidelines or at parent-teacher conference, and we talk about the tutoring and the traveling soccer leagues and all that sort of stuff. And we freak each other out. And it's this difficult situation in which we cycle each other up into sort of a death spiral of anxiety about whether or not we're worthy or whether or not our kids are going to be okay or whether or not we're doing enough. So, yeah.
Jessica, in you enumerating, sort of that history and all of that, which I think will resonate with any parent on the planet from almost any country. It got me thinking about a letter we got this morning from my son's college saying that second semester is going to continue to be a pass-fail option for all their classes. And I thought fail was an interesting word to throw in there, but okay. Yeah. How about as parents, can't we just pass or not pass? I mean, why are we, I'm thinking of writing an article on this now, just prompted by what you said. I mean, why can't passing just be good enough? Like, we are all doing the best we can. So why do we need to compare and grade each other or grade our kids in that way?
I think, as someone who has been really dependent on grades, I love that external validation. I can say, I never read reviews of my stuff, or, when I first started writing for the New York Times, I had been warned, don't read the comments, don't stay away from the comments. But I'm like, I'm just going to peek just to see what people think. I need to know what people think of me, all of those sort of, I need that feedback. And, when it's good, that's great. I feel good. I feel validated. But at the same time, that's not what we remember. What we tend to remember are the things about what I could be doing better, what I did badly. The one article there are two articles I've written that I really wish I could take back because I've learned since then. And those, of course, over, a decade of writing professionally, that's what I remember, the things I wish I could take back. And the problem is that, that's that need for external validation, we then sort of put onto our kids as well by saying, if you get all A's, you can have this money for those grades, or you can have this car if you're, on honor roll the entire time you're in high school. And the problem with those is all of those extrinsic motivators don't work. They actually undermine motivation over the long term. And when I think about what I'm most proud of and why I write, it has nothing to do with those comments or those reviews. Like, I don't try harder as a writer because I'm hoping for a bigger payday or I'm hoping for a different comment or a different review. I write because I'm completely engaged in the thrill of that creation. And, my husband is a physician taking care of people. He's an infectious diseases physician. And I don't think, we've talked about this a lot, like, the promise of a bonus isn't going to make him work harder as a doctor. He's not going to take better care of his patients if he thinks he's going to get paid more. So, that's what we want for kids, is to sort of focus them towards those intrinsic reasons for wanting to be engaged rather than those external carrot and stick things that don't work. But we've come to depend on them because that's how our business world works. That's how grading works. That's how a lot of our systems in this world work, for better, for worse, which is for worse.
That is actually the perfect segue into my next question. So I loved this one statement you made. You said, the less we push our kids toward educational success, the more they will learn. The less we use external or extrinsic rewards on their children, the more they will engage in their education for the sake and love of learning. And I think that is so true. So I guess my question is, how does a parent encourage intrinsic motivation, especially if it's a parent who maybe has read your book and is realizing that they need to make some changes when they're trying to change from that nagging, or the parent who kind of swoops in and saves the day?
Yeah. So that idea of sort of intrinsic over extrinsic motivators and why that works and how it engages kids, that's not my stuff. That's research based on, Edward Deci, DECI, wrote this wonderful book called Why We Do What We Do, The Science of Self-Motivation. There's actually like 50 years of really good research on intrinsic motivators. And to get a kid intrinsically motivated, you really need to supply three things. That's more autonomy, which is more choice over the details of their life, how they get the homework in, when they do the homework, in what color pen they do the homework, where they do it. These sort of details that kids tend to not have much control over. We need to help them feel more competent and not just confident. We need to help them sort of have a confidence based on real life experience, trying something and screwing it up and trying it again. So autonomy, competence, and connection. And the connection part for teachers, when I go speak to teachers, is this really, like, it can take 2 hours. It's really wonderful. It's the secret sauce of teaching. And it's about interpersonal connection, and it's about relevance and engagement and all that fun stuff. But for parents, it really comes down to two really clear things. You have to love the kid you have, not the kid you wish you had. And that means, and that getting that feedback from kids, this is something I hear from them a lot, that they really believe that their parents love, their brother more, their sister more. The parents wish that kid was the brother or the sister, or that the kid was some mini me version of the parent when they were, their age, that kind of thing. So love the kid you have, not the kid you wish you had. And you can't just love them based on their performance. When we're exchanging love in exchange for, the grades we want, the outcomes we want, that's called outcome love. That's called, or withdrawal of love based on affection, that kind of thing. And it's really dangerous. It's really emotionally fraught for kids. But the way you actually do that, the way you prevent yourself from not loving your kid specifically, but loving some imaginary version and only loving your kid based on performance, is to do one really simple thing, which is to remember that this is a long haul job, that learning is a lifelong thing, and that we focus more on the process of learning, growing, becoming, maturing, whatever it is, and less on the end product. The cool thing is, number one, it makes us chill out. It helps us sort of derail some of our anxiety. We really do need our kids to believe us when we say we care more about the learning than the grades. But the other amazing thing about focusing more on the process and less on the product is that for kids who have a lot of anxiety, and kids who are highly perfectionist and tend to do that sort of death spiral of anxiety when it's an 89 versus a 91, those kids really respond over time to the insistence on a focus on the process and less on the product. So it helps us, it helps the kids, it helps them believe us when we say what we really care about is the learning. And it brings all of that focus back to this word yet. No, I can't do this yet, but that is a process sort of getting there. So we'll focus more on the process, less on the product. Don't just love your kid based on outcomes.
That was great. I thank you for summing everything up. I'm going to make my my 14-year-old daughter listen to this, because I told Jenn just last week, she asked us why we don't pay any of our kids for grades and why we never have. And I said, that's interesting. You should ask. I'm reading this book and she said, yeah, no, what's the real reason? So I'm going to have her listen to this.
And you can go read Ron Lieber's The Opposite of Spoiled. He's the Your Money columnist at the New York Times. And I explain it in my book, but he explains it even more deeply about why we should not be paying kids to do household duties either. So yeah, getting off of that train is an important one too.
Yeah, we talk about school being your job, and that's just your job. It's not a paid job. It's just your job that you get up and do every day. So I want to switch gears a little bit to something you talk about towards the end of the book about opportunities to express gratitude. I just sent all my girlfriends, including Jenn, hers is probably going to arrive in the mail soon, a 5-minute gratitude journal. And I'm going to try, as a parent and as an individual, to make that a daily practice or an every other day practice, the best that I can do. And you mention in here teachers receiving daily complaints and that it's rare that they hear feedback on success. And it's funny because my daughter has a new drama teacher that joined the school brand new this year, never had even met the kids face to face. So has been doing everything online, brand new teacher. And he has saved the year for my daughter by directing this musical that they're trying to do virtually and may get it in person, this and that. And he is the most wonderful ray of sunshine. She comes out of every, drama class and every rehearsal. All she wants to talk about is Mr. Lewis. And before I got to that chapter, I sent a letter to the middle school director just saying, look, I don't know that you know what's going on in these new classrooms and all these virtual classrooms, but this man has just saved the year for my daughter. He's a gem. His enthusiasm is coming through all those things. And I think it's so much easier to complain than it is to show gratitude. Could you talk a little bit about how that feels sort of as a teacher and what advice you would give to parents on practicing that?
It's funny. I actually just wrote a note to the principal of my son's high school because during this whole COVID thing, the communication between home and school has not only been really clear, but it's been very much rooted in, this is not about punishing kids for breaking the COVID rules. This is about keeping our community safe. And his communications have been so beautiful that we finally just my husband and I wrote him a note just saying how grateful we are for him during this time, because, to have solid, empathetic leadership has been such a wonderful gift. But as a teacher, we do tend to get the negative more than we get. Most people do. I mean, if you think about the number of times any employee tends to hear great feedback, it's really, really rare. We tend to, complain a lot and not give the good feedback. So as a teacher, that was invaluable. I can remember, I keep all of the notes I get from my students. I've kept most of the notes I've ever gotten from parents. It really helps, especially since they often, I don't know what the juju in the universe is, but they tend to come exactly when you need them most. So it also helps when you express to a teacher that you value the learning and you help them understand that you're sort of on the team together and that your focus is not necessarily the difference between that 89 and the 91, but that you're all in it together to help the kid learn and grow and become, especially in middle school, as you know from reading the book, that's where my heart lies. I think it's the most magical place ever. That when a teacher knows that the family is on the same page in terms of the learning stuff, that's really when you feel supported and appreciated. And especially now, I could go on for hours about the hurdles that teachers are facing right now and how difficult it is right now to be a teacher. So any honest and positive feedback you can get back to a teacher will be highly appreciated right now. And it really builds what we know from the research is that the better homeschool connections are, really the more kids learn. That homeschool relationship is really integral to kids learning. And that emotional tie is also really important, that learning is inherently an emotional act. And without a good emotional connection to the teacher, to the material, to the school, whatever it is, then kids won't learn as much. So it's all good. Any good homeschool connection is good.
Quitting. That's a concept that
Yeah.
we come across often. As educational consultants, it's a big thing for high school students, who have been invested in, for instance, a sport for years and years and years, and the kid wants to quit, and the family is like going nuts because, gosh, that can't happen. You talk about the benefits of quitting, what quitting can lead to. Why could quitting be a good thing?
I just did a sports podcast just recently, and his take was you never quit, really, that like you don't, especially in a team sport, you don't want to let the team down, that kind of thing. And we talked about this middle ground where, childhood is a time when kids are supposed to be able to try out a lot of different things. And it's not that I'm saying you should let kids quit, and willy-nilly anytime they want. What I tend to stick with is like, okay, well, if you've made the obligation for this semester or these 3 months, this one season, the nice thing about seasons, as KJ Dell'Antonia found in her book, How to Be a Happier Parent, is that seasons are really the amount of time you need in order to lay down habit. So that formation of habit is a good thing. And so, 3 months isn't that long. Anyone can do something for just about a season. And so, try to get them to stick with it for that long. But when it comes to things like, I hear from kids all the time who've said, can you please tell my parents that it's okay for me to quit swimming? I know I've been doing it since I was 5 and they feel like they have so much invested in it, but I hate it and I want to try other things. And that ability to try other things are the opportunities I'm talking about. For kids who love one sport and have loved one sport since they were a tiny kid, fantastic. If the kid is in it because the kid loves it, that's a completely different thing. But if a kid just wants to try lots of different stuff, that's fantastic. Go read David Epstein's book, Range, about the importance of having experience doing lots of different things, moving toward, a synthesis of various skills. When my kid quits one thing and tries out, he tried jewelry making, he tried welding, he's tried all kinds of cool stuff. And some of that is not going to be for him. But imagine a situation in which, as an adult, you decide to take guitar class. And after like 4 lessons, you decide, this really isn't for me. I hate it. And then your spouse or someone that's in power says, no, you can't quit because you committed. That's it. You're in it for years now. That doesn't seem to make much sense to me. But it also has to do with your own family priorities. When I tell stories about my kids quitting piano lessons, for example, and us literally rolling the piano out of our house and down to the neighbor's house down the hill, I talked about that as being something I wasn't willing to sacrifice our relationship and the daily arguments we were having over piano. But that's because we're not an incredibly musically motivated family. It's important to us. We like music, but it's not like everyone has to be playing an instrument all the time. What that led to was the older kid learning guitar on his own, based on, YouTube videos and online instructors, and being way more invested than he ever would have been in the piano because the guitar was his thing that he found he did love. There's a great line in Stephen King's On Writing about they let their son quit saxophone because he was practicing, but not for 1 minute longer than he had to. And then it would go away in its case and it would not come out until the next practice session. And if you're not enjoying it to a certain degree, and if it doesn't if there's not some play involved, you're not going to stay invested over the long term. So think about your family priorities and why exactly you're insisting on your kid remaining in an activity that they don't love and what your end game is. There was an article in the New York Times once the title was, "Your kid is not going to play sports in college. Now what?" So when we talk about our kids being invested because they've been playing soccer since they were 5 years old, I don't know what you think the return on that investment is going to be, but it's probably not going to be being a professional athlete. So what exactly is it that you're in it for?
So it's so interesting to listen to you kind of share these anecdotes, because what happens, and I have older kids like you do. I have 22, 20, and then 16 and 14. And what's funny is what happens when they start to talk to you, in their high school years. Sometimes you hear, I wish I could play piano like some of my friends. Why did you let me quit? Or didn't I take lessons? I wish I could read music now. And I thought, if you only knew what I was pulling teeth. And it's funny, as an adult, my 22-year-old said, who's a very humanities, Latin, English driven student, said, why didn't you put more mathematics books in front of me? And why didn't you, expose me to more science? Because I wish I knew engineering, and I wish I, could be an astronaut. And I thought, we're all exposing our kids to not just what we know, but what, and sometimes, you live in California, we don't have ice hockey here, or we don't have certain things that other kids are getting exposed to. And so I guess we do the best we can, but coming from your advice, I mean, it is, the spice of life is trying things. So it is fun to dabble in so many things. And, I agree, this pursuit of, this minutia of, the Olympics or the athlete or whatever it is missing the boat.
Well, and when you look at, and I'm, like I said, I'm a friend of mine, KJ Dell'Antonia, for example, she talks about this all the time. She's my co-host on my podcast, and her family's been incredibly invested in hockey for a very long period of time. And it's their family thing, and it's what they love. But the one thing I had said to my kids about traveling leagues is that it wasn't something I was interested in participating in as a parent, simply because, family time is really sort of sacrosanct for us. Quiet time on the weekends, reading time, those sorts of things were things we weren't, and sleep is the one thing that's a non-negotiable in our house. And if something starts to intrude on that, then we have to really think about what our priorities were going into it in the first place. So, it comes down to your family's priorities, what you want as a family. And for us, time together to have dinner together and talk in the evening, that's what we really value.
Last question for you.
All righty.
You advocate staying out of kids' friendships. Why?
Well, I don't know if your parents ever tried to force friendships on you when you were in middle school or high school or even in elementary school. Think about what friendships are really about. When kids are really, really little, it has to do with proximity. Mommy's friends with this person, and so the two kids of those two, of that, your kids are friends. That's a proximity thing, and and a lot of it has to do with just sort of who's there and are they the same age. As we get older, relationships become more and more about shaping identity and figuring out what you want to be and trying it out with other people. And one of the things that happens is that there's going to be normal social jostling, which, by the way, is not the same thing as bullying. Normal social jostling and having fights and, getting shunned every once in a while, those sort of things happen. And part of learning how to negotiate with other people and deal with other people comes down to that sort of talking to your friends when you have when you're having a beef with them, and apologizing and learning to, make relationships work and not just have them end and be over forever. But parents intervening and sort of forcing kids to get back together, short of, pulling the sort of reverse parent trap situation, that's fine. If you want to trick them into being in the same place at the same time so that they can have a conversation, okay. But if you're going to try to force two people to like each other, that just doesn't work. And I sort of beg parents every once in a while to think about, whether it's what we're talking about now or talking about reading kids' texts. I'm 50, and when I was in middle school, the equivalent of texting was talking on the telephone. So let's say that kid that I had a big crush on called me on the phone, and someone went up into the guest room and picked up that second line and put it up to their ear and listened in. I would have been mortified. And reading a kid's texts is akin to picking up that extra line and sort of listening in on the conversation. So giving relationships some space, understanding the role of relationships, that sometimes, middle school friendships don't often last as long as, they're not going to be like our bosom friends for the rest of our life, like Anne of Green Gables and her best friend. These are relationships that often form, dissipate, form again, dissipate. And we have to give respect to that and let kids sort of deal with some of that on their own, because that's how they learn to do a lot of the social emotional skills that they're going to need in adulthood. And us mucking around in it, we just get our parent stink all over it, and we tend to mess things up more than anything else. And it's not going to stop the behaviors. And especially as the kids get older, more parent interference in those relationships is just going to sully the entire relationship beyond recognition for the most part.
So I know we're wrapping up, but without turning into a whole technology conversation, which we could have, hours just on that. I am curious in that comment you made about picking up the phone, because I think that is generational. And the only thing that's tricky about this texting is how permanent it is. Right. And the phone call is a conversation that's past that can be, I guess, retold in hearsay. But this sense that what is going on in this conversation thread, not that, I don't know. I think it ebbs and flows times that I sort of peak to just check how things are going. If I'm checking in with one of my kids and I'm not getting a lot of feedback, there's the argument that you own the phone, you pay for the phone, therefore you can kind of hang on the phone. I'm torn on that comment, just because I do feel like there's a technology etiquette that kids still have to learn. And we can have those conversations around the table as well. But I sometimes tell my kids, and like you said, the parent trap, I tell them scary stories that are kind of lies about, like, I heard about this kid who thought he was private texting and had a lot of bad language, and someone screenshot it and he got expelled, or just to sort of just remind them the scary sides of things. And I don't feel like that's a bad thing. Some might say, don't lie to your kids about that. But I just feel like anecdotally, it can help, serve as a warning.
Again, this comes down to family priorities. So in my, you and I may make different decisions about this. There's a wonderful article that Lisa DeMora wrote in the New York Times about the danger of surveilling kids' phones. I personally have never, ever looked at either of my children's phones ever, mainly because I need for them to feel like they have things of their own that are private. I need for them to have a place to talk about stuff that they don't feel like they can talk about with me yet. There are also surveillance, which is, I'm not saying we can't do it, but what we're talking about really is surveillance, whether it's watching where our kids are or reading their texts, that kind of thing, is also undermines their sort of motivation to have that etiquette, to be honest with you. And it's from the research shows also that kids who are more controlled lie to their parents far more than kids who are not as heavily controlled. But this comes down to family priorities. You just keep in mind certain results that you may not expect can happen. So for example, I was talking to these kids, and one of the girls in the group had been shunned. She had just been cut out, not altogether, but she'd been, from a texting perspective, just shunned. She was cut out of the texting thread that they'd been doing for a long period of time. And they hadn't really talked to her about it because they were kind of embarrassed to. And so as a result, she just felt abandoned. Now, the reason that she was shut out of the text thread was that they knew that her parents read her texts, and they didn't want their privacy impinged on. And so they just cut her out. And, so just from my perspective, and what's funny about this is I have never read either my kids' texts, emails, whatever, or their journals. One kid keeps a journal, and he does not believe me. He does not believe that I've never read his stuff. But as a writer, I absolutely am familiar with the sacrosanct space that you must have as a writer to be able to express things. And there's a wonderful book by Lonnie Coombs, Coombs, and she's a former prosecutor. And she talks about the fact that, sure, if you have probable cause, like if you've seen the drug paraphernalia, then sure, go in the room and look. But you also have to remember that you can never unsee something that you have seen. So if, for example, your kid is gay and hasn't come out to you yet, or your son is worried about something and hasn't told you about it yet, it doesn't mean they're not going to tell you about it. It just means they're going to tell you about it when they're ready. And if you see it and you go to them with it, not only have you undermined the trust they have in you, you have blindsided them with stuff that they're not quite ready with yet. So there are lots of reasons to read kids' texts and emails. And believe me, in our house, that rule is, I can reverse that rule at any time I want. If I was really worried about my kid, I would. But, fortunately, we haven't had to do that. But it is 100% a reversible rule at any time without any notice. But that's the way we've gone in our house. And there's a wonderful book by Devorah Heitner called Screenwise that I highly recommend. There's a wonderful book by Jordan Shapiro called The New Childhood. And of course, Lisa D'Amour's writing in the New York Times, and specifically that article about monitoring kids' phones, is a really just eye-opening look at sort of the pros and cons. And there are pros and cons to both. Absolutely.
Well, Jessica, we're going to send you a copy of the Parent Compass because we want you to quote us too. You're so well read and knowledgeable, and all the nuggets and information you've shared is going to be so helpful to our listeners, to parents. Tell us just what you're working on now, or if there's anything new we need to know about, and then where we can find the gift of failure and follow you.
Well, and first and foremost, if you go to jessicalahey.com, under my speaking menu, there's a big button that says download speaking bibliography. And it's like my greatest hits, all my favorite books about like parents, kids, and tech, and, all the stuff. It's all there. What I've been working on is this book, The Addiction Inoculation, Raising Healthy Kids in a Culture of Dependence. And that book came out of the fact that I'm a recovering alcoholic with about 7 years of recovery. My kids are I have 2 kids with a genetic predisposition to substance abuse. I taught for 5 years in a drug and alcohol rehab for adolescents. And so this book is an evidence-based look at what does and doesn't work to prevent substance abuse in kids. And I'm in the proposal and research phase for my 3rd book, which, I haven't sold to my editor yet, but it takes me usually about a year of research before I'm ready to really pitch it to my agent and editor, and before I feel like my head is around the research enough that I can pitch it out there. But the Addiction Inoculation will be out on April 6th, and hopefully I'll be out there, talking about it wherever anyone will let me do it. So soon.
That sounds great.
Thank you so much for your time today and your wisdom. We just love learning from you, and we're grateful.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so much fun to talk about this stuff. And I love, we can agree to disagree on various topics, and there is no one right answer for every kid. There is no one right answer for every family. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that. It's not like I'm going to be grading, your parenting after this and give you both a big gold star because you've given all the right answers.
I just want to pass, not a pass fail. I just want to thank you so much, Jessica.